Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Eddie Marcus again, spokesman and advocate of basic human rights for as in heaven, so on earth. Today I want to speak to you on a very special matter, a matter that every last one of you, I would like to introduce it to you, for I would suggest or think that very few of you have ever heard anything about it. And it is called God's economic system. Everybody got an economic system. The United States has capitalism. Some places got socialism. Some places got communism. Some places got you name it, and they got it. And every last one of them are different than God's system. In fact, I always tell people that they exist in retaliation and resentment of God's system. And it goes something like this. I'd like to share a scenario with you that might make it a little bit easier for you to understand. So I went to a mall, and as I pulled into the parking lot, it was really crowded. I mean, cars were everywhere. They had the lot marked pretty well, accommodating heavy traffic. And you had to squeeze through, but if you could drive, you can park. And as I came in and parked, I began to walk towards the entrance. I saw many buildings all around, and I saw one main building connected to another main building. And these were entrances where you would go into the mall. And within the mall, you had all kinds of stores. I mean, you name them from any street, and they were there in the mall. As I walked into the mall, I began to see how the structure was made. I began to look at the architecture. It was fine. I began to look at the floors and what they were made of and what they had put on the floors to make the designs look so extraordinarily beautiful. Then I began to look at the lighting and the displays that were made available. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who have had access to these kinds of things, you know it can really be grand. And then I began to look at the materials, the items that were in the store, that which was being marketed. I saw all kinds of fashions for men, for women, for pregnant women, for little children. And I just saw things that were designed for the weather, you name it, and they were there in this one store. Beautiful, ladies and gentlemen, all shades, all colors, and jewelry, and cologne, and perfume, and oh man. And then I walked out of this store because there were so many different sections in this store. They had everything you could imagine. They had appliances like blenders and cookware and microwaves and air ovens and oh man, it was out of sight. I can't begin to list all the things that they had going. But they had as many things going on in this one store as they had going on in all of these stores down the corridors. However, I still walked out into the corridors to see how things were. And I saw the decoration just as amazing out there as it was in the store. In fact, it was more amazing because it was variety that I was able to see there. I was able to see places where the kids could assemble themselves and play. I began to even see where they were bringing SeaWorld into this particular mall. I began to see work that was still being done, like escalators that were being put up and made operational. I mean, everything was just grand. So I just was amazed. I walked on and I looked at this store that was specific to a concern, and I looked inside and saw what was happening. And I looked in another store and saw the same kinds of things that were happening in each store, my friend, without me trying to go through all of those stores. They were really magnificent. I began to walk by some stores that had jewelry, every kind of bracelet, rings, necklace, watches, cufflinks, you name it. I mean, they had variety, and it was looking absolutely magnificent. Some of it looked so expensive, you say you could never get a chance to put it on. And even some places had jewelry that was not so expensive. You won't call it well, you could call it costume jewelry, but it wasn't the cheapest kind. I don't think they had any of the cheapest kinds there. And they had hair shops where you can get your hair done, you can get your eyebrows done, you can get your nails done. They had it all. They had food court where you could get chicken and Italian dishes and Asian foods and cookies and cakes and coffee, and it was absolutely fantastic. And now, you can imagine where I'm going with that, so I'm just going to speed ahead. The only thing that took away from the beauty of all of these things that I just shared with you is that regardless if you went into a store to just look around, that was one thing. But if you picked up anything and you said you wanted this, as you got ready to exit the store, you had to make sure you went by a cash register. Now that cash register determined whether or not you were going to walk out of that store with it as owner, or whether you were going to have to put it back, or whether you might be stealing it. And that was in every store. Every store. And what did it represent? In America, that represents capitalism. Capitalism. But now I want to use what I've just shared with you to tell you about God's economic system. Now, all of the fashions and everything that was produced in that store was made by somebody that was special to that particular product, even from the building, even to the laying of the deck, the floors, the colors, and all of these things were produced by someone. And they did it for money. So when they went into a store to pick up some of these items, they could walk out with it when they stopped at the cash register to pay for it. You've heard it said that the cattle on 1,000 hills belong to God. What does that mean? That means that everything belongs to God because everything was made by God. And those things that were made by human beings were an expression of materials that had been put in the earth somewhere, on the earth somewhere, above the earth somewhere, whether it was seen or unseen. And the ability to extract it from its hiding places is based upon the gifts that had been instilled upon each individual that gave them a yearning, something to participate in. And what we call this is a participation in the creative process, to be sure that all of those things that I just mentioned to you could be made manifest by the hands of those who had the gifts and who were employed to do those kinds of things. And they did it all, ladies and gentlemen. They did it all. Those people who worked to do the buildings, they got paid. The people who laid the carpet, they got paid. The people who designed the clothes, they got paid. Who designed everything, who did everything, they were all paid for the simple reason they could purchase these things. Now, in this process, ladies and gentlemen, there were a lot of people who were left out. Out of all the various things that were done, there were millions of people who were not engaged in that process, and they weren't able to walk into those stores and purchase anything. Many of them have to live on assistance, whether you call it public aid, general assistance, aid to defend parents or families with dependent children, or some other means of social contributions. And for one reason or another, that basically you would say is okay, except in this process you have a lot of crime and violence. You have a lot of poverty. You have a lot of deception and lying and cheating and stealing, and all of these things also produces racism and bigotry and hatred. All of these things are a consequence of the particular system that I just got through explaining to you, as wonderful as it might sound. And out of that, you got people in jails, and you got people in prisons, and you got people that's committing all kinds of crimes like lying, excuse me, murdering, and just harming and hurting people and hating people. Now, I've given you a very, very good description of America's system. And all of the other systems, though they have different names, they come out the same. But just so you can really understand God's economic system, when God's economic system is employed, you see the buildings that's built. You see the floors that are laying. You see the colors that are designed in the structures and the architecture. You see the merchandise that has been designed and produced. And you see people putting it in places, stacking it or storing it, or what you call, I can't think of the word right now that I'm looking for. But all of these particular jobs that had been manifest in the system of capitalism, they are also exercised in God's system. The only thing is there was no money exchanged anywhere. Now I know that scares the heck out of you, because you wonder how was that done. In the capitalist system, everybody got paid. Otherwise, nobody was going to do anything. And now I'm telling you about a God system where all of these things were done and nobody got a paycheck. Let me explain that to you, ladies and gentlemen. It happened like this. First of all, every job that people did, it was a job that they had chosen to do, not to make money, but because it was what was in their heart to do. It was their gift. It was their choice of careers. It was what they wanted to do. And by having the opportunity to do these kinds of things, gave them the greatest joy of all. Even to whether you were in sports, basketball, football, acting, singing, dancing, all of these things are gifts that have been given by the Creator to be exercised before the people, to bring them joy, to bring them fulfillment and completeness, and aiding in the fulfilling of their dreams. You say, how could that be done? Nobody got any money? That doesn't make any sense. Well, let me ask you this, ladies and gentlemen. Everything that I mentioned earlier about the capitalist system, about getting that money, and I also specified what that money was for. That money was to pay for food. It was to pay for clothing. It was to pay for shelter. It was to pay for education. It was to pay for health care. It was money to be made through investments. It was all of these things. And these things are absolutely needed. However, under God's system, they got everything that they wanted, that they need, that they desired with money. They got it without money. Because by engaging themselves in the process, everybody engaging themselves in the process, and the process is so interconnected that everything that they did played a part in the physical manifestation of all the things that existed by the hands of man. So that means that everybody who engaged themselves in a career were actually co-owners of everything that existed. So they didn't have to pay for it. They didn't have to buy it. It belonged to them. And so all they had to do was go through the process of accessing it: food, clothing, shelter, education, health care. It was all there for them to just claim and to use. So they didn't actually need money. And because it was done this way, they didn't need to be deceived. They didn't have to have any type of poverty, no crime, no violence, no lying, no cheating, no stealing, no racism, no hatred, no bigotry. All of these things were eliminated because they were doing things the way God wanted it done as a family. Everybody engaged in the process. That is what we call God's economic way. Now, many of you have heard that there have been some violence that's taken place in this capitalist system and other systems of the world. And it's directed at people while they were worshiping or giving some type of allegiance or recognition to the power that is superior. Some call it their God. And you might ask yourself, why is it that this violence is coming down on these people who represent something that I just described? Well, many reasons exist, but the one that is consistent with what I have been sharing with you here is because those people who have been left out or know someone who have been left out, those people who have found themselves left in poverty, they have expected or hoped that those who talked about a superpower, those who talked about a God, would be able to do something that would make their life situation better, that they would not have to suffer, where they couldn't catch a plane and go anywhere, they couldn't travel here or there, they couldn't go to the store and get this item that they really wanted, they couldn't do any of these things. And while they knew they were in a system that denied them these things, there was a religious order, a higher power order out there expressing something about a power that was to make things right, to make things better. And over time and time again, this power wasn't doing anything. So it made the people who were left out angry that they had been hypocrisized, that they had been lied to, and they got to a point they were fed up with it. And they wanted to exert that anger at someone. And who else could you exert it towards except those who are talking about this power but not delivering? And so these are the consequences. Now, this was operational in the capitalist system, or in the socialist system, or in the communistic system. But in a God system, no one would be left out. Everyone would have their due. Everyone would be satisfied. And so there would be no need to be angry with anyone. There would be no need to even have a gun, to even think about hurting anyone, because everybody was essential in the making of all of the dreams that were out there by the billions. So when I come to you, ladies and gentlemen, and I say, speaking to you about God's economic way, you haven't heard of that. Even in the Bible, they talk about money. And I'm sure many of you would use that as an argument. They would talk about when somebody was talking about paying taxes. And then you would have to admit, if you're going to talk about those things, that Jesus responded to them, say, render to Caesar that which is Caesar, and to God that which is God. Now, if you recognize that God is the maker of all things, then the only way Caesar got something is because human beings exercised their power under fear and gave it to Caesar. And Caesar used the power that he had been given to lie and deceive and take and take and take. And this is how they used it to say that some were more important, that some were better. And they used their methods of rewarding those who they had suggested were better and deserved more. This is how all of that worked. And in order for these things to not happen this way, ladies and gentlemen, that means that the system is going to have to change. Now, when I talk about that capitalist system, I want you to know that that system is anti-God. Now, many of you, even though you can't see where I'm coming from, you don't know the role that you play. Say, for instance, you dug a ditch for a wage. You designed some product for a wage. If you got paid for anything that you did with money, it was a fulfilling of the adversarial system, the system that is ungodly. You were being paid, you were being used, you had been deceived to solidify and substantiate this system that is working against God. But you didn't know that. God knows you didn't know that. That's why I've been spending the past 40 years finding some way to give you this message, and you still haven't understood. And as I tell you this today, you don't understand. You think I'm crazy. But the reality of it is, ladies and gentlemen, is that I'm not crazy. You are crazy because you don't know God's way. Now I stand before you to introduce you to God's way. God doesn't expect you to accept this right away, but in time you will. And what is going to happen in time? People are going to have to suffer, and more suffering. More taxation is going to have to be exercised to take more of that little money that you have been receiving. Whether it's taxation through your employment, whether it's taxation on the items that you buy, whether it has to do with increased costs, all of these things to take more of that which you have been counting on to aid you in doing the things that you want to do. And as you and your ability to possess these things are diminished, then you're going to start thinking. You're going to start wondering, how can you stop this? What's wrong with this? You're going to begin to see the problems with it. You're going to begin to want to know some solutions. And I don't care what you come up with, and you might come up with several different ways or more that would make it a little bit easier for you. But the crime and the violence and the lying and the cheating and all the other stuff that I've identified that has been happening is going to still happen. And if you want to get rid of it all and live in peace, to be prosperous, to have freedom, you're going to have to do it the one way, God's way. But God is not going to force it on you. God has given you choice. Choice, my friends. And you have a teaching mechanism that says you shall reap what you sow. That's the purpose of it. So when you do some things that didn't make any sense or made some sense at the time you did it, when the consequences come back at you, you're supposed to think, whoa. Or if you plant a seed and your fruit come back rotten, even if it came back the first few times looking good, when it comes back inadequate, something that you don't want, it's supposed to make you think. And through thinking, you're supposed to discard those things that doesn't produce and feed back the kinds of things that you want. Not just be bound to it by a law. Not be bound to it by a law. Because in the United States of America, 2019, the President of the United States is teaching the people that the laws that they thought they had on the book is not sufficient enough in this capitalistic view to hinge him, to tie his hand. And the only thing that would, if it could, would be moral laws. And they got no moral laws. These laws are not passed based upon morality. These laws are passed based upon protecting those who got from those who try to get it back. You know, ladies and gentlemen, so that's the bottom line. When you talk about God on the cattle on 1,000 hills, you're talking about a system of economic expression that allows everybody to be able to play a part in the creative process. And in so doing, they are able to receive and benefit from all that they together have come and caused to manifest itself. So I hope that, ladies and gentlemen, I might have given you some kind of idea. I want you to know that there are things that goes on in this society basically because we don't exercise God's way. In fact, just a thing to mention, I heard some community people say they wanted to teach police how to serve and protect the community, while you had the union of the police talking about teaching military tactics. Now, you can see those two different odds. One is saying bring the policeman down because you're killing these black people for nothing. And another one is saying things are going to get so rough that if the police is not equipped with military tactics, they might be overcome. And they got to protect themselves above any community service. All of that because you don't want to do it God's way. I hope I've given you some kind of idea, ladies and gentlemen, of what it means to consider God's economic view, God's economic perspective, and how it would work for you, contrasted by what we know every day that is eating our life away. I want to thank you so very much for giving me this your time, and I hope it has not been a complete waste. I hope some of you have gotten something out of it. I understand that you cannot stop trying to pay your bills just yet, But what we want you to know is that God has a view. And as time rotates on, we would like for those of you who know God to start advocating, so when your representatives start coming into office, they let you know that they're going to work on policies that would institute, they got to go gradually, institute God's way and start eliminating this old way of the adversary that's causing all this pain and suffering amongst you. And you, ladies and gentlemen, it is you that got the power. It is you that will be able to get them and motivate them to do these kinds of things, and not the lobbyists. You're going to have to set the lobbyists aside and let them create and establish these policies, and that everybody who come in a leadership role know that you, the people, are working your way out of this way, this old evil way set up by, some say the devil, some say Satan. Listen here, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard it said that people do anything to get their money. You say people sell their souls to get that money. And many of them do. Why do they sell their souls? Because they don't have an option as far as they know. You can't talk about God alone and not deliver in action. So you look at them as selling their souls and say they are no good. You fail them, especially those of you who say you know God. If you don't know God, you just failing along. It's no big thing. It's those of you who say you know God, who are born again, filled with the Holy Spirit and fire. You're the one that's failing. You're the liars. You're the hypocrites. You're the ones that are allowing all of this stuff to happen in God's name. And this is why God is so hated all across the globe, because you are faking. My mission is not to just put you down, but to draw this to your attention in hopes that you would change it, because you got to if you want to have a better life. Thank you so very much. Eddie Marcus once again saying bye-bye.